Right, welcome to Telsig. This is one of our more improvised sessions. In the studio, I'm here today with Vic Wilson-Crane from Kaplan. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today.
So we were having a few technical issues, so people are going to be jumping in and out of this podcast, but that should keep us on our toes. What we're hoping to cover is to carry on the conversation about the value of embedding AI in our education provision at university and to see where this takes us. So I'm just going to introduce Vic first, or let her introduce herself and talk a little bit about her background, where she's placed in higher education at the moment, and to talk a little bit about what you've seen with regard to AI provision being incorporated into higher ed.
Thank you. So I work for Kaplan International Pathways, which is part of Kaplan Inc., one of the world's largest global providers of education. The part that we offer is pathways education for students who are preparing for higher education in the UK. And we feed it students into 16 different universities in the UK at this moment. So students spend time with us doing either foundation certificate programmes or international year one, feeding into year two undergraduate programmes, and also pre-masters before they go on and do master's study. And they come from all over the world where the education systems don't match up exactly. And we're able to provide students with a mixture of English language, academic skills, and also subject knowledge where they would need that to kind of bridge any gap before they enter UK higher education. I head up something called the Centre for Learning, Innovation and Quality, which is a group of technical and quality experts that help us within our pathways provision ensure that everything we're offering to students is kind of the best quality it can be, and also as close to the cutting edge as we can get in terms of this very fast moving area, particularly around using technology to support learning, whether that's making things more enjoyable, faster, providing quicker feedback to students, making opportunities for students to demonstrate their knowledge and skills in an easy way for them as well. So our unit works with all the colleges within the network, and we try and ensure that we're providing opportunities for students to learn in ways that's going to best prepare them for what they're going to face at university.
How have you seen the requirements that HE institutions are looking for change over the last few years? I mean, obviously the conversation has been dominated by AI recently, but it's not the only technological innovation. And we've seen the way students learn, their behaviour in the classroom, the way they're assessed, adjust in response to a whole range of things like classroom tools, machine translation, and now AI. So what have you noticed in terms of what it takes to prepare students for study at a higher education institution?
Mm-hmm. I think I would start with, we did a review of our curriculum, which it feels like a long time ago now, but it was rolled out just before the COVID pandemic hit, so in 2019. And at that time, we spent quite a bit of time wondering whether students would bring their own devices into the classroom. And we made a lot of provision in case students weren't ready, couldn't afford, weren't able to bring in devices. And in our largest college, which is over sort of 1,500 students, I think we had one student that arrived that term without a device that was suitable for their learning, which is a real a little bit of a surprise of ours, even though we'd done some market research and we talked to students about that. So kind of we were off and running from then, really, in terms of students bringing their own devices and learning in quite different ways in the classroom. With that review, we brought in a significant amount of active learning. So we encouraged students to be doing things in their own time, doing their kind of input. So if they had to learn facts or knowledge about something, they were doing that much more in their own time, where they could go at their own pace, where they could repeat things back, and then making better use of in-class time, using technology, but not solely technology and not only technology reliant or dependent, but having them use that time in the classroom to explore, go into more depth, to really, with scaffolded with tutor support, try to really build on that learning that they've done. Then that was the kind of first step that we took within our organisation to try and get students ready for what they will face when they go to university, which is much more independent learning than what they've experienced back at home. So I think that was probably the first element that we did. And then secondly, in terms of how have we seen that change happening across different institutions, I think it's really hard to say what is university doing at the moment. And that's perhaps one of the challenges we've got within the work that we do, because in one or two of our colleges, we prepare students for a range of different universities, not just going into one institution. I think it's been very difficult to get a real handle on what an institution is doing about something, let alone what a sector is doing. Obviously, we follow things like the Russell Group principles when we've been trying to sort of seek out what are the guiding principles that institutions are taking on board. But even down to a kind of department level, we've seen at some of our university partners, the advice and guidance include, ask your lecturer what they would accept or not accept. So what we've tried to do with our students is, as we do with lots of stuff around academic convention, encourage them to be aware that there are rules out there, and the rules that they face at our colleges maybe are along the lines of, but won't be the same as what they will face when they go to the university. And having them be prepared to seek out, to ask questions, to, if they're going to do something that they think this feels a little bit unusual, or perhaps it's not what my friend is doing, to get some advice and get some support, so that they don't then walk into a trap of kind of any kind of academic integrity issues if they're using generative AI tools, for example, in ways that they shouldn't be doing. That said, we are trying to encourage students to use generative AI in the early stages of their learning as a learning tool. And then for some assessments, we do encourage students to use generative AI, but it's been quite a long road.
Right, okay. Painting a very positive picture there. It all sounds really great. I'm going to jump across to Jim, because I know Jim's done a lot of work at Nottingham Ningbo in China. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've made your adaptations to your EAP provision there?
So I think over the last 2 years, there's been a working group. We are perhaps a little bit behind, or compared to what's just been said there. We're at the policy stage. So there is a clear policy. There's been, I think, significant changes to the academic misconduct policy, and we're starting only now, to bring that into syllabus. So sort of introducing intended learning outcomes that deal with ethical use, perhaps making ethical decisions about how to use it. Practical use. So, for example, with our library new search, we have Scopus AI, which helps the students summarise articles and do the initial stages of research. So those are two sort of major things. But I think in terms of the university, it's very much tutor dependent, and I think each tutor within each department has their own take on it. And although there is a university policy, it's very, very difficult to kind of say anything across the board. From my point of view, I'm at the stage in the classroom where I'm experimenting with it. Probably the students are telling me, educating me about it, because they're quite far ahead. But I think we might be not quite at the stage where we're able to kind of integrate it into assessments yet. I think that might be the next stage for us. I think, and the prompt, the prompt writing and things like that, we're not quite there yet, I think.
Thanks, Jim. So if we talk about things like prompt writing, so Deanne, I'll jump over to you in a sec, but anyone chip in on this? Do you feel like prompt writing, for example, this is kind of something that's often raised as a skill that we need to be developing both for, further academic study, perhaps the workplace. Yes, it's important to know your craft, but it's also important to know how to use Gen AI to kind of, do I want to use the word supercharge? I've just heard somebody say this on a recent podcast. All your employees now have superpowers thanks to Gen AI. I'm not sure quite how far I'd endorse that. But if you take something like prompt writing, do we see that as an academic skill they should be learning in university to sort of complement what they're learning on any given subject? So I appreciate, Jim, you're a bit early days on this, but Deanne, I haven't done a proper intro to you because of our improvised nature of this podcast. So if you want to give us a quick intro of where you are and what you're coming from and what you're doing with the AP at the moment, and any thoughts on AI-based learning outcomes that we should be working towards.
Sure. So Deanne Cobb-Zygadlo, and I'm at Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan. I'm also the co-coordinator along with Phil for the Balip Telsig. So I have a bit of a dual role, but today I'm grateful to be able to speak on this. So I can talk a little bit about institution, about our own program, and then my own personal slant on it as well. I'll try not to speak too long. The institution has a much more flexible policy in that the schools can set their own, which it gives the opportunity for our engineering department that is developing their own AI for the Kazakh language, the opportunity to actually do that research and promote that within the students. On the other hand, other colleges have a complete no AI policy and are going back to secure in-class exams as a way of trying to deal with questions over assessment reliability and validity in the post-plagiarism era, if I can use that term. So for our own unit, which is the Center for Preparatory Studies, the foundation program here, I've been teaching here for 11 years. Our own policy is that AI is not allowed for any assessment whatsoever across the program, regardless of what topic, not just EAP, but maths and leadership as well. That's the policy. Now, it does also say, though, unless your tutor has, your tutor can give you guidance on some exceptions sort of thing. With a little bit of prompting from me, our policy introduction to students this year included the information about the environmental cost of AI use. And so this is one of the aspects that we're looking at, is that, yes, we're discouraging students from using it, one, because of assessment validity, but also because we have concerns over the cognitive offloading of learning onto AI and that reduction potentially in learning potential when students are first response is to go to AI. And so because that is our kind of nexus to a certain extent within the program, we have decided that the best approach is to talk to students about AI, not just in terms of what it can be used for, when, how, but also about what is the cost, what is the societal cost, what is the ethical cost, what is the responsibility to the future in going to becoming reliant upon these tools, on using them for fun, on using them as a go-to response. And my head of department is doing a lot of research as well in terms of talking to students to find out what their thoughts are on AI and its place in the program. And even the students are recognizing that this AI dependency, or it's probably more of a maladaptive behavior, is a risk. And I think that that's a very interesting thing that the students recognize that. So while we are talking somewhat about AI and AI tools, right now we're still at the point of kind of talking about why it's not necessarily your first go-to.
Just off the back of a couple of things that Deanne said there, she talked about cognitive offloading and the environmental impact. So we've got two right there issues which are pretty decent reasons not to make generative AI your go-to port of call for either assignments, in-class tasks, or anything else you're doing. So cognitive offloading, we touched on this in previous episodes, but this is the idea of farming out your critical thinking and some of your cognitive functions to a third party, in this case, Chat GPT. So I noticed, Jim, on your when you sent over some of we had a bit of an exchange on the email, and you said that you were looking at students with using AI for brainstorming, using it for planning and things like that. And I think you were starting to think about ways of incorporating that into your EAP provision. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And, if you see that there's a tension there between, on the one hand, sort of educating students on how to use it, but you're also trying to avoid this habit of making it your go-to tool.
So I guess at that point, and I mean, this illustrates how quickly this is moving, we were thinking about or looking at their own brainstorm first, and then perhaps brainstorming with AI and critically examining output, or indeed paragraph generation and so on and so forth, and critically examining AI output, which is perhaps possible over a year-long course when we've got the students for a full 2 semesters, not perhaps something that you can spend time doing on a 6-week pre-sessional. But I mean, essentially, to go back to what Deanne was saying about cognitive offloading, what I'm questioning now, what I'm starting to question, there are 2 things: the cognitive offload or the shortcut. The idea that we learn through going. Traditionally, we think about learning as having to go through some sort of difficulty, which the students perhaps no longer have to go through. So, are they indeed? What is the depth and quality of that learning? So, and then also the environmental cost, which was something I'd heard a colleague talk about, but very briefly, but not actually researched myself. And then I noticed also somebody in the other podcast, perhaps was it Charles or Tui, mentioned the military investments of some of these companies. So I'm now, as my knowledge is developing, it's developing both slowly and quickly at the same time, if that makes any sense. I'm questioning, I'm re-questioning what I've already done, what I've already put in place. So a very, very complex situation, very complex. I don't know if that answers your question in any way, Phil.
No, I mean, I don't think there's going to be too much in the way of hard and sharp answers here. I just to anecdote a little bit. So I'm in the middle of design. I ran a little pilot AI literacies course last year, which I'm fleshing out this year. And it's kind of part of the English for academic purposes provision. So it's this general sort of looking to augment the kind of usual academic skills that we do. And one of the lessons that I learned was that it's just, working with prompts, talking about the ethical issues, the idea of farming out some of your thinking to Chat GPT or your tool of choice. They're very separate skills to the kinds of things that we would traditionally focus on at university. And it's not that easy to gel them with things like, referencing, where we'd say, right, we're working on your language proficiency. We'd like to teach you how to write a coherent paragraph, but, while we're at it, let's reference these points we're making and start thinking critically and talk about authorial voice and these kinds of things. It's not quite that simple to transition into prompting and into, what should you be doing, brainstorming versus editing and these kinds of things. It sounds like it should be, but actually I found it was quite tricky. And we ended up talking about AI skills and kind of a separate entity. So that was just by way of response to a couple of things you mentioned there, Jim. But I'm interested with Vic, if you have any sense of, we talked earlier about transferability and maybe with an eye on employment later. Have you got any sense at the moment on which of these skills that we call it core skills, transferable skills, which of these are valuable, and are there any kind of AI related versions of these skills that you're getting a sense that we should be paying more attention to in our prep for students?
Yeah, I think I've got 2 answers to that, really. As you say, none of us have all the answers at all, but I think I've got 2 answers to that. I think part of it is I said one of our motivations for including the use of AI, and I totally take on board the point around ethical use in all its senses, so ethical for the environment, but also ethical in terms of honesty of where your knowledge is kind of come from. I think we think it's really important that we do broach that with our students, because we are preparing them shortly to enter a world of work where one would imagine that hopefully we're going to be a few stages on than where we are now, but I don't think it's going away. So I think it's really important that we encourage students to think in ways that they will be using in the future. So, for an example, this week, putting together a policy paper on something, I didn't do that on my own with no resources under very strict time pressure. I did that by starting a bit of a draft, consulting Chat GPT, editing that draft a bit, sharing it with my peers, getting some feedback, producing a second draft. And we started to take these approaches to some of our assessments on some of our programmes, because not only will that be hopefully a more enjoyable way of learning and a more creative way of learning, but it will also be a way of learning that will be similar to what many of our students will face when they go into the sorts of jobs that we kind of expect some of our students will be going into. So I think it will be remiss of us to continue to assess students in ways that don't expect them to be using sources in the way that, years gone by, those sources will be in a library and we take something off a shelf. And the source now is via a tool like Chat GPT or other AI tools that are available. So I think part of it is trying to make sure we do expose students to it and we reward them for using it. But secondly, I think also building on the transferable skills that AI, for now at least, cannot help with. So I've done a significant amount of work on something we call our kindness curriculum, which is about personal skills. There are 12 attributes that we've identified: compassion, humility, collaboration, trust, and trying to help students develop those skills well, because I think they will be ever more important in a world where we can contract out some of the other stuff to generative AI.
Listening to you talk, I think, do you see there's a bit of a trade-off there between some of the skills that we're talking about with fully utilising generative AI and recognising that we don't live in a world anymore where information sits on shelves in libraries, but also this idea of going through the process that you talked about, like I'm using AI as an editing tool and it's really helping me shape my ideas. Is there part of that process that sounds really innocuous, that we've taken it and we've given it to Gemini or whatever, but it's part of the content creation process that we'd normally be pushing ourselves through, and we're building a bit of resilience by sort of, you might hit a brick wall sometimes, especially at 2:00 in the afternoon when the sun's shining and you're trying to edit this abstract down and your brains just turn to sludge. And there's a temptation there to just stick it in Chat GPT and tell me how to make it better, which I've done. I'm totally guilty. But is there something we're losing there in the fact that we have that's a slight shortcut, is very innocuous, but is it something that if we get used to doing it is going to impact our other transferable skills, which we need to refine?
Yeah, and I know where you're going with that, because conversations we've had as well around this is it's kind of all right for us to do that, because we know we've got our own either innate or developed sense of what is good quality and what's not. And if you shortcut that and you haven't gone through that kind of learning process, it is very, very difficult for you to apply your critical skills. And I know you've been doing quite a lot of work around that to try and help students develop those. So yeah, and I know where you're going with that. I don't think I've got an answer, but I think it's something to be aware of, and to think about how we could then what skills would we not want to lose that we want students to develop, and how can we help them do that, but not in a way that's going to either mean that they will resort to using a generative tool in an underhand way, when we've asked them not to. When they're sort of under time pressure or where they're under stress in the example that you gave. I'm interested about that.
Yeah, I don't think this is one that is solved Yeah, and I think counter arguments go, yes, but there's history is full of trade-offs we've made as tech develops. I'd like to just sort of jump over to, I was going to ask to jump over to assessment, but Deanne, you're here live and co-hosting. Is there any other direction? Did you want to steer us any other way off the back of what's been said so far?
Well, I wanted to jump off a little bit of what Vic said there, in that perhaps one of the differences is that while her focus is often working with more mature students who are looking at retraining or transferable skills and employability, we in the EAP Foundation sphere tend to be dealing with young adults who have not yet developed the skills, the other skills that would make them employable, that are still struggling to get past that binary thinking of it's either black or right or wrong, black or white, it's right or wrong, and not able to see that multiple perspective or look beyond just, oh, this is the information it comes up with. Interestingly, as we start to teach our students these different skills, like things like information literacy and source evaluation and that sort of thing, the students become a little bit more aware of the limitations of AI. And so, one of my students last year was quite capable of telling me, well, Chat GPT isn't a good source because we don't know where their information is coming from. It's all very obfuscated. Even if you ask Chat GPT for sources, it's not necessarily the sources that it's pulling it from, because that's not how AI works. That's not how that information is generated. So I think part of the reason why we might have very different views on its role may very well be coming from what is our function within the university or the education sphere in terms of where our students are when they come to us. But one question I did have for you was about the demand from employers. What are employers saying about what they see as AI literacy? Is the focus only on productivity, or is there also a focus on things like privacy, legal responsibility, on making sure that data remains somewhat controlled within the companies? And so what are they asking? What do they see AI literacy to be? Is it simply how, and how to script it, and what tools to use, how to get the most productivity, or are there these other aspects that they're also asking of students?
I think in answer to your question of what employers are looking for, I think it's probably as difficult to pin down as what universities are after. The sorts of employers that are accepting sort of a graduate entry type of roles, I can only anticipate that in a sort of knowledge type of job that it's going to be around how you generate ideas, how you are critical of others' ideas, how you then form new knowledge, and how you develop. I think there is a productivity track, and obviously concerns around, does that mean that a job won't exist any longer? And it's a common phrase that people say that your job isn't at risk. Your job's only at risk if you're not able to use AI effectively. So I think from a generative AI point of view, though, I think it's more to do with the example that I gave in terms of producing copy, producing documents, maybe producing summaries of documents for other purposes, that sort of thing, that I would anticipate is going to be really, really encouraged and supported. And then there's a whole challenge there just in terms of privacy, intellectual property, how much are universities or institutions or companies prepared to share of that, and have they got enough kind of walled garden support from a tool that will enable people to just kind of free as you go. I know as a private company, we are strongly encouraged to use the tools that we've been provided with, and obviously dissuaded from using things that are of our own our own subscription. And we have a set of Kaplan rules of the road which help us know what we may or may not be inputting, both personally identified data in or intellectual property. But again, it's kind of evolving all the time. But I don't know if anybody else has got any awareness of kind of employer needs from maybe different backgrounds as well, because I'm talking mainly from a kind of UK perspective as well.
If we're not perhaps dealing as much with proficiency, English language proficiency as much, where we can add value is this sort of contributing to the creation of a holistic student. You know, I don't want to be sort of zen about it, but just making good people and the needs of the workplace. I think that here in China, we as EAP teachers have very little idea of what actually occurs in the Chinese workplace, and what our graduates actually do. I'm sure that information exists within the university, but because of the way that it's connected, you know, that information isn't given to us. I mean, I just saw a student who was on a pre-sessional last year who'd done an internship at Deloitte, and a lot of the, you know, there's a lot of business graduates and so on, but it, you know, obviously delighted that they had an internship at Deloitte, but what did that involve? You know, I've absolutely no idea. So I think there's a huge disconnect between, which would be it would be really helpful for us to know, because again, that would help us add value to the student experience. We're just guessing at actually what is happening in the Chinese workplace, and in general terms, we don't know what skills they're using, and certainly now, you know, you can just add AI to that list.
I guess data must be coming through now, because we've got, especially where in this sort of November 2022, when Chat GPT came out in public use, this was most of the undergrads who started their degrees around that time will be soon entering the workplace. So it would be interesting to see what sort of data comes through about preparedness and what employers make of the effect this has had on core skills versus AI literacies and those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, it would be nice if a lot more of this was fed back. I think there are papers that are coming out on this, but there is obviously a delay in peer review process as well. So it would be nice to get more of a direct conduit. Right. Tech issues aside, I'll make this final thoughts section.
I think one of the things that we haven't talked about here that is quite important is this fact that AI will often mirror what we want it to be. And so, you know, AI is particularly good at kind of saying what it thinks we want to hear, and it makes things simplified. I mean, we talk to our students about, you know, don't make overgeneralizations, but AI is overgeneralization after overgeneralization, and so it tries to keep things simple and easy to consume. And beyond that, too, we're starting to see these AI engines being developed that, without naming any particular big names, that are skewed and biased towards a particular political ideology or a slant on information. I don't know how much this can be true, but, you know, I've seen even things, accusations that certain AI engines may be checking for how prominent people may think on an issue before putting out responses. Again, no one specific, but this is we have to think about who it is that's getting to make the decisions about what is the information that we consume. And that's one of the dangers that we have in becoming reliant upon AI in the long term. And I think, there is a role at all levels of education for discussing the role that technology has in our lives and to what degree we are willing to step back and let technology lead. So I guess my end point is if my students don't get anything else from the rest of the year, I'd want them to at least come out with an idea of, okay, I can't just use it indiscriminately. I have to really think about when, how, why, and then critique what comes out. And to do that critique, I need to know myself what I'm looking for.
Right. On that note, I'll just ask the last word to Vic, because she's been so optimistic about this whole thing. I'd just like to know if there's anything, any caution that you have, or any adaptations you'd like to see, anything higher education could be doing more of in this area.
Yeah, I think the one thing on my mind at the moment is, I think it was Deanne mentioned about sort of reverting to exams, and we know how some assessment types really are not great for people with particular learning preferences or with particular diversities. I would be really, really concerned if we chose to go down that route. Not only because I don't think it's an authentic way to assess people, as I've just said before, the activities we do in the workplace, you very rarely do something under such heavy time pressure with such high stakes, with no resources, with no opportunity to speak to anybody else. So I really, really hope that we're not going to go down that sort of route with assessment. But my other concern is if we do really lean into generative AI, I just don't want us to end up in a world where student uses generative AI to create the assessment, teacher puts it into a generative AI tool that marks the assessment. What happens in between? I don't want us to lose any of that kind of creativity. So what I'm really interested in at the moment is that kind of like different stages that we can choose to mark and give feedback to students. And it's not only on the end product, and how do we give credit for that process and support students work within that? Because that's my kind of, if I've got a kind of bell of caution ringing, that's it at the moment, around how we make sure, what does the human do in all this, both at the production stage and at the marking stage?
I'd just obviously like to say thank you to B. Bond for volunteering me for this. And because up until very recently, I've had my head quite firmly in the sand about the whole issue. And I've learned an enormous amount just listening to the podcast, discussing it with you guys here. Very, very thought-provoking. So thanks, everybody. It's, huge learning experience for me. Don't edit that out, Phil, please.
Thanks. That's really nice of you to say. We're all on. I was going to say, I'm glad you feel it as a positive experience. I just want to say for anyone listening, we've overcome about 15 hours worth of technical glitches to actually get this recorded, and we've done it all without AI. It's not helped us a jot. So this whole experience has been a shout out for human ingenuity. So I'd just like to bookend the podcast with that. Thanks, guys. Been a pleasure.